First up is a film called Honk for Jesus, Save Your Soul, and it stars Regina Hall and Sterling K. Brown. Sterling K. Brown stars as the pastor of a megachurch in the South. Regina Hall is his wife, so I guess like the first lady of the church. And while they used to preach to tens of thousands of people, they have fallen upon trickier times and now are trying to reopen and re-debut. It's filmed in a mockumentary style, which I think will inherently set people up to think it's an outright comedy. And it does have funny moments, but I do think it's actually more critical in a good way than the trailers and promotional materials may make you think. I saw this one back at Sundance, and I recall I've watched it since, but I enjoyed it, but it wasn't, maybe successfully in a way. It wasn't satisfying at the end, which not every film has to leave you feeling warm and fuzzy or that everything was wrapped up with a bow, et cetera, et cetera. But I think the biggest challenge for me is I didn't necessarily feel like the characters had growth. And it feels very necessary for every film to have characters have to go on a journey. You need, something to compel them along. And they do go on a journey. I just worry that they came out of it the same people at the end. And maybe that was just my interpretation of it. I think people are going to take different things away from it. I also have zero experience with organized religion in this sense. One of the only reasons I knew some of the framework of the megachurches, et cetera, is from Real Housewives of Salt Lake City, which tells you, again, my foundational knowledge level, because there's a pastor, she's a pastor of her church there. But, I do think that there are some really clever, nuanced moments in this film. This isn't a big, bright, in-your-face film. Again, I think the most misleading thing is the marketing materials trailer to what the film is actually covering in terms of content. And that's not to say it's also a downer, etc. I just think it has more depth than the trailer lets on in a good way. So this film is out streaming, and it's also in theaters, but I think for me, the fact that it's out streaming is kind of what saves it, because I don't know if I would be like, yes, you have to go see this in the theaters. It's not a huge film in terms of visual spectacle and all these things, and the story is somewhat contained. So I think especially if you do have experience with the South in particular and Baptist and megachurch culture, like this will really resonate with you in terms of the community and, I assume the pastors. Even as an outsider, there are some very telling things that I was like, oh, this is a very clever way to demonstrate, this couple's relationship with their community. And, for better and for worse, I think Regina Hall is truly outstanding. And this Sterling K. Brown is good, but Regina Hall is really what elevates, I think, the film from being like, no, don't watch it. To, it's worth watching. I just would temper your expectation. So I'm going to give it 3.7 out of 5. And then the next thing I have is The Lord of the Rings, The Rings of Power. And much like everyone else, I've only seen the first 2 available episodes. Sometimes I get to see more of things, but in this case, same as everyone else, I'm on the fence on this one, and it's challenging. So I have read all of the books. I have not read the Silmarillion and the appendices, which this is based upon, in a very long time. And also, those books are not really prosaic. They are appendices. They are, written in a more, encyclopedic way, I would call it, or almost biblical, actually, in that I remember there being a fair amount of begats happening. So they're not, you really have to expand upon the stories in them in order to make this, which gives you a lot of freedom, which is great. But it also is a lot of responsibility. And right now, 2 episodes in, I'm not feeling the same immersion and love for this world that I felt upon entering the world of Fellowship of the Ring, for example. And I'd read all the books before those movies came out, because that's how old I am, / that's just the order I did things in. And I just remember being absolutely obsessed and transported and all of these things. And obviously, it's not quite fair to Rings of Power, because we've had this, cinematic universe established at this point. We've had the Hobbits, which did their own, I'm not going to say damage to it, but they were a different quality level and immersion level, it feels like. I think a lot of it has to do with like CG versus practical effects, and just building out the physical worlds and how much the Hobbits relied on those. But at the end of the day, really, it's story, right? Like, story is what is going to draw you into these things. And I think the challenge with Rings of Power right now is that there is a focused story, right? We are looking at the rise of Sauron, or the re-rise, or whatever. We're looking at a couple characters we sort of know. We've got Galadriel and Elrond, who you will recognize from the Lord of the Rings film trilogy. I don't love their performances yet, and I have to realize that, of course, they're elves. They have very long lifespans. These are different characters than the ones that we see hundreds or whatever, how many years later. However, I think the performance thing more has to do with the actors involved, and, not to shade them, but it's big shoes to fill. Really big shoes to fill, and you have to do a really good job to differentiate yourself, and so far, not there yet. I think the other thing is, we are following a ton of different storylines, and I don't feel invested in any of them yet. Again, we're got the classic driving story of good versus evil, and that we're hunting down evil and all these things, but you need that emotional and character hook to get into it, and I think something like Fellowship establishes it really quickly, and again, advantage of we have this wholesome protagonist at the beginning who's Frodo, who's like all of us and just along for the adventure and all these things. This sort of have the, again, I think sort of is the key word for this review, because it's sort of like the films. It's sort of the characters we know. It's sort of got some of the elements, but it's just not there yet. And again, thinking about it, okay, we've seen 2 episodes of it. That is a good 2/3 of at least the first Fellowship of the Ring. By the time I was into that, you are in, you are invested. This, I don't feel that. And again, maybe it is that whole big playground thing where you have a bunch of different characters to focus on, and there's not this one like super centralized storyline, or it's going to take longer. And again, I will also acknowledge this is a series, not a movie. And so, yeah, of course it's going to take longer to get to the thing that whatever they're trying to do here. But I either want to get there faster, or I want to spend more time being compelled by these characters. And, right now the dwarves are the front runners for me, which is not a bad thing. No shade to dwarves. But they were the ones I had the most emotional connection to. So obviously I'm going to stay with it. But I have, not to get involved in the churn of online discussions, but I have yet to talk to a hardcore fan who's like, oh my God, this is exactly what I wanted from this. And I've yet to talk to a casual fan who's been like, oh yes, this is exactly, like, this is what it's going to take to get me into Lord of the Rings. So it does sit in this weird middle ground right now, and it totally has time to distinguish itself. I just went in with low expectations and still was, quite frankly, kind of bored during these first 2 episodes. So we'll see where it goes, but it's not a strong recommend. And in fact, I would say if you are someone who was tepid on it, don't start yet. I might come back to this and explain like later, yes or no, come watch this show. But if you are a hardcore Tolkien fan, like, you're going to watch this no matter what. So it doesn't matter what I say. And I hope you enjoy it. And I hope there are a million things for you in it. But for the casual fan who's considering it and is not the most invested yet, I'd say let's hold off for a little bit.